My name is Laura Bennett, and for most of my 58 years, I've been the kind of woman people count on. I kept my head down, wrote the checks, made sure birthdays had cakes and Christmas trees had lights. Quiet was my way of keeping the peace until last night, when my future daughter-in-law told me to leave the rehearsal dinner I had paid for. We were at the Harbor View Hotel, a glass-walled room overlooking the Pacific, strung with warm lights and full of the sound of silverware against china. Samantha stood in her fitted white dress, smiling for everyone but me. Then she leaned close enough that the bridesmaids at the next table could hear and said, "Laura, you should leave. You're making people uncomfortable." Her tone was sugar with a grain of salt big enough to cut. Conversation stuttered. The band's soft jazz seemed to trip over itself. Ethan, my only child, my 30-year-old son, looked at the floor. He didn't touch my arm, didn't ask me to stay. I felt my fingers tighten on the handle of my purse, the one carrying a signed $50,000 check meant to cover the last of their wedding expenses. I didn't say a word. I walked past tables of guests who suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Outside, the wind off the water slapped against my cheeks, and the hotel doors sighed shut behind me. I stood for a moment watching the reflection of string lights ripple across the bay and wondered if this was what all my years of being the bigger person had earned me. By the time I reached my car, the hurt had hardened into something sharper. In the glow of the dome light, I opened my email and pulled up the folder labeled Wedding. Every contract was there: venue, catering, florist, photographer, band, all in my name, all paid from my accounts. They thought I'd quietly swallow the insult. Instead, I tapped the number for the wedding planner. She answered in a chirpy tone, ready to review final details. "I'm canceling," I said, "all of it." Her pause was long enough to hear the ocean again. That night, I went home to a kitchen table covered in contracts, and for the first time in years, I felt like the quiet might actually belong to me. By the time I set my purse down on the kitchen counter, the dome light of my car had stopped buzzing in my head. The house was still just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rush of wind along the eaves. I slid the stack of contracts across the table, lining them up like cards before a bet. The venue came first. My call went straight to the manager. She greeted me as if she already knew my name from the letterhead. When I told her I was terminating the contract, she hesitated. "Ms. Bennett, that's a substantial change. Are you sure I said I was?" She reminded me of the cancellation clause, the forfeited deposit the other couples who might be interested in the date. "Release it," I said. The sound of her typing was brisk, efficient final. The florist was next. She offered to scale back the arrangements, maybe just the bridal bouquet and a few table pieces. I pictured Samantha's Pinterest board, the elaborate arches of roses, and felt my jaw tighten. "No thank you," I told her. "Cancel everything." The caterer didn't argue. A storm had closed the highway north, and my cancellation meant one less worry on their end. "We'll process the refund for anything unused," he said. His tone was almost grateful. When the last call was made, the table was scattered with open folders, each one holding proof of my name and my money. I could feel the space in the house shifting, less like a waiting room for someone else's party, and more like my own home again. The phone lit up with Ethan's name, then Samantha's. I let it ring. I poured myself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and listened to the quiet. It didn't feel like absence. It felt like the first sound of something starting. The pounding on my front door started at 9 the next morning, sharp and impatient. When I opened it, Ethan stood there in yesterday's clothes, his hair flattened on one side like he'd barely slept. He stepped inside without asking. "You canceled the venue," he said, not as a question. I did. He began pacing, hands cutting through the air. "Do you even understand what you've done? People have flights booked. Samantha's family is furious." I set a mug of coffee on the table, the good roast I save for company. He didn't touch it. "What I understand," I said, "is that your fiancé told me to leave a dinner I paid for, and you stood there and said nothing." His pacing slowed, but he didn't look at me. I didn't want to make a scene. Oh, but it was fine for her to make one. My voice was calmer than I felt. This isn't just about that night he shot back. It's about everything. You're always controlling. I leaned against the counter, folding my arms. Controlling is paying for a wedding and expecting not to be humiliated in return. He opened his mouth, then shut it, his jaw tight. "This is why Dad left," he said. The words landed like a stone in my chest, but instead of breaking, something inside me locked into place. "Your father left because he liked doors he could close without explaining himself," I said evenly. "You should know that." He looked away, shoulders rising and falling. The coffee had gone cold between us. If Samantha asked me to leave again, I asked, "What would you do?" He didn't answer. When he left the door, latch clicked softly. The question stayed behind, hanging in the quiet like a draft I wasn't ready to chase away. By noon, my phone lit up with a text from my sister. Careful words wrapped in politeness, the kind that really meant, "What did you do?" I ignored it, but when the next call came, I couldn't. Greg's name flashed on the screen. I hadn't spoken to my ex-husband in months. His voice still carried that salesman polish, the one that made strangers feel like friends. "Laura, you need to be the bigger person," he said, skipping right past hello. I let him talk about flights, about guests, about how embarrassing this would be for both families. The word optics came up twice. "Where were you?" I asked. "When Samantha told me to leave in front of 50 people. Where was that bigger person?" Then, "This isn't the time to dig up old wounds," he said smoothly. "Just let them have their day." There it was. Let them have their day, which in Greg's dictionary meant keep paying and keep quiet. I stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the rosemary bush trembling in the breeze. "My job is not to protect your image," I told him, and ended the call. The quiet that followed wasn't heavy. It was sharp, like a thread being cut. I remembered myself at 23 standing in a lace gown that cost more than our first car. Greg's mother had pulled me aside that morning and whispered, "Quiet women keep families together." Back then, I thought it was wisdom. Now I knew it was a command to disappear. I had spent decades wearing silence like a uniform, calling it love. But peace bought with my absence wasn't peace at all. It was permission for others to take more. The phone buzzed again with a number I didn't know. I let it go. I was done answering to people who only called when they needed my wallet. Late that afternoon, an email appeared in my inbox, bright and bold, final payment confirmation. At first, I thought it was spam, but then I saw my own address and the last 4 digits of my American Express card. 14 nights in the Maldives, an overwater villa with a private butler, unlimited champagne, a private yacht excursion, total $25,140. The booking date was 3 weeks ago, the same Tuesday I'd met Samantha for lunch, listening to her compare napkin textures as if nothing else existed. I scrolled down, a second confirmation, designer luggage, spa packages, a private chef deposit, all charged to me. None of it authorized. I leaned back in my chair. Nothing inside me cracked. It settled, like a stone finding its place at the bottom of a river. I opened my banking app and began tracing the charges. The list grew, and with each line, the shape of it became clearer. This wasn't an accident. This was a plan. A slow, calculated siphoning of my money, dressed up as love and gratitude. They hadn't just taken advantage. They'd counted on me never noticing or never confronting them if I did. I closed the laptop long enough to feel the grain of the table under my fingers. Then I reopened it and began organizing. Every receipt, every date, every dollar. People like to call it betrayal. I called it arithmetic. I drafted an email to Karen, my attorney and oldest friend from high school. "Need your eyes on this. Urgent." Her reply came in minutes. "Come in tomorrow morning." Relief didn't come because she could fix it. It came because she would see it professionally without asking me to make it sound prettier than it was. I shut the laptop and slid it an inch away. Tomorrow I would stop being quiet for good. Karen's office sat on the second floor of a brick building that overlooked the harbor. The windows caught the morning light and threw it across her desk, where my binder of evidence now lay open. She scanned the credit card statements, my notes, the printed contracts. "You've done everything right," she said finally. Every contract is in your name. If they want a wedding, they can pay for it themselves. I asked about the charges on my card. Unauthorized use, she said without hesitation. We'll send a cease and desist for the online posts and a demand letter for reimbursement. And you should freeze any account Ethan can access. Her words didn't rush. They landed. My shoulders lowered not out of relief, but out of alignment. Karen began drafting letters while I sat back and watched a gull land on the streetlight outside. Her assistant came in with envelopes, certified mail slips, and a pen that felt heavier than it looked. I signed where she pointed. When her phone rang and her eyebrows lifted at the caller ID, she let it go to voicemail. You don't need to hear whatever that is right now, she said, sliding copies of each letter to me. Add them to your binder. Paper is slow justice, but it's justice. On my way home, I called the bank. Ethan still had access to an account I'd opened for him during college. $7,500 had been withdrawn last month, days after I'd paid the venue deposit. The number didn't look like money anymore. It looked like a line I hadn't drawn soon enough. I froze the account, then texted him, "Account closed. Contact Karen if you have questions." He replied in minutes, blaming, accusing, twisting. I didn't answer. The road along the harbor was bright and clean, and I wasn't about to let him pull me back into the fog. That evening, Samantha went live on Instagram. Her face filled the screen eyes, shining with practiced tears, voice trembling just enough to sound unscripted. I never thought my future mother-in-law would destroy our wedding out of jealousy, she began. She threatened the vendors. She's unstable. And we've done nothing but try to love her. The comments poured in heart emojis, words like toxic and spiteful. Friends told her to stay strong. Strangers offered sympathy as if they'd been in the room. I didn't comment. I took screenshots. Every sentence, every timestamp, every stay strong babe went into my binder under a new tab Karen had labeled defamation. An hour later, the tone shifted. Someone in a local wedding group posted a cropped image of the honeymoon confirmation email, my email circulating without my help. Replies changed from sympathy to suspicion. Who actually paid for this? Isn't that Laura's card? The thread went quiet, then boiled again in a different flavor. Ethan texted, "Stop making it public," as if I'd stood on a stage, as if I'd spoken at all. I replied with Karen's office address and nothing else. I turned my phone face down on the counter and started on the dinner dishes, even though it was just me and one plate. The rhythm of washing and rinsing steadied my breathing. Linda called next, my sister-in-law, who collects gossip like seashells. She spoke in a half-whisper, warning me about what people are saying. "I'm fine," I said. "You don't sound angry." "I'm not," I told her. "I'm done." Outside, the wind pressed the rosemary against the kitchen window. The scent almost reached me through the glass. I left the lights off and stood in the dark, letting the quiet stretch until it felt like my own. The email from the venue arrived the next morning at 10 sharp. A's requested the date has been rebooked. I read it twice, waiting for a wave of satisfaction or regret. Neither came, just the quiet click of something closing. By noon, the florist had posted a story about an unexpected opening this weekend. The band followed suit. Friends began messaging some fishing for gossip, others pretending concern. I didn't reply. They weren't asking about me, they were asking for a plot twist. Saturday dawned clear and blue, the kind of day Samantha would have circled in gold on her vision board. I drove an hour south to a small resort tucked into the cliffs. The front desk clerk smiled and upgraded me to a suite with a balcony. I booked a massage-ordered room service and carried a glass of champagne out to the balcony. At 2 o'clock, when the ceremony would have started, I let the sun warm my shoulders and watched the waves roll in. I didn't picture the chaos, empty chairs, frantic phone calls, guests wandering. Chaos belonged to them now, not me. I took a photo of the view, blue sky, whitecaps, the rim of my glass in the corner. Captioned it with 2 words, "Best decision." No tags. The phone buzzed with reactions I didn't open. I slid it under a magazine on the table, like pressing a stone onto paper. That night, I ate dinner alone in the resort restaurant. The waiter brought dessert on the house. Maybe out of kindness, maybe because he saw something in my face that wasn't sadness. Back in my room, I stood on the balcony as the horizon swallowed the last line of light. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to happen to me. By the second week, the gossip had rolled through town like a strong offshore wind. You could hear it in the clipped conversations at the market, see it in the way certain people avoided eye contact. An anonymous florist posted in a local forum that she had warned a bride her future mother-in-law was the contract holder. A bridesmaid hinted in the comments that all the money had come from one direction only. Even Ethan's old college friends weighed in online posting memories about how he had a knack for dodging blame, how silence was his favorite escape route. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I saved the posts that mattered and let the rest drift away like foam on the tide. Samantha's accounts went private. Her father called once, his voice careful, almost rehearsed. The message wasn't about mending fences. It was about money thinly wrapped in concern. I forwarded it to Karen without a reply. In the grocery store, a neighbor patted my arm and said she was praying for reconciliation. I smiled, asked about her garden, and we ended up talking about tomato blight. It startled me how ordinary life stayed when I stopped tending to other people's narratives. I went to the hardware store for a new garden hose, choosing the heavy-duty one that doesn't kink. The cashier offered to carry it out, but I tucked it under my arm and walked to my car. At home, I trimmed the rosemary bush and tied small bundles for the freezer. The kitchen filled with its sharp, clean scent. On the dining table sat my binder, thicker now, but lighter in my hands. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was proof that I could walk away from a storm without chasing it. On a Monday morning, an email from Ethan slid into my inbox with the subject line, "Let's put this behind us." He wrote that he and Samantha had decided to forgive me, that I could still attend the ceremony if I promised not to make things awkward. There was no ceremony left to attend, but the arrogance in those lines almost made me laugh. I read it twice, then pushed back from the desk. Outside, the bluff trail ran along the edge of the bay, and I let my feet find it. Ice plants bloomed in wild pink and orange pelicans glided low over the water. My breath matched the rhythm of the waves. Back home, I sat at my desk and typed a reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. I know the difference now between silence that erases you and silence that protects you. I chose the second. Day by day, the noise faded. Samantha's family stopped calling. The group chats found another wedding to dissect. I spent more time in the yard baking bread that didn't rise perfectly, but tasted like home-calling friends I'd neglected. One afternoon, I sat in a cafe across from an old friend who didn't try to turn my story into a tidy moral. She listened, stirred her tea, and finally said, "I'm proud of you." Then she told me about her dog's surgery. We laughed at nothing until the cups were empty. That evening, a text from Ethan lit up my phone. "Can we talk?" I stood at the sink watching the words glow on the screen. I could have answered, carried the conversation like a fragile vase. Instead, I set the phone down and turned off the light. Some doors don't slam, they just stay closed. On the last Sunday of the month, I sat on the back steps with my coffee and listened to the street wake up. Somewhere down the block, a scooter rattled past. A dog barked twice, then stopped. Someone in the next yard was running scales on a trumpet. Ordinary sounds stitched together like a quilt. I should have felt lonely. What I felt instead was space room enough to set down bags I'd carried too long. Inside, on the dining table, my binder waited. I opened it to the first tab receipts, letters, screenshots, notes in blue ink. Evidence, yes, but also a map how a woman could step out of the center of a storm without trying to stop the wind. I closed it and slid it onto a shelf. The story wouldn't vanish, but it no longer ran my house. Later, I walked the wet line where the tide had come in and gone out. I thought of the rehearsal dinner, Samantha's words, Ethan's silence, and all the versions of myself I'd been expected to keep funding. I also thought of the planner's surprised pause on the phone, the banker's simple yes, and Karen's steady hand sliding legal papers across her desk. People had met me where I stood. I had met myself there too. A gull landed near my feet, head cocked as if waiting for judgment. I gave it none. I let the waves rearrange the shore again, knowing the ocean doesn't see change as dramatic, it sees it as constant. Back at the car, my phone buzzed once with a calendar alert. I drove home past bougainvillea and mailboxes, each marking a life I didn't need to manage. In the kitchen, I set a single place and ate without rushing. The quiet was still mine. And this time, it was enough.